Small remark, can the owner of a black Volvo V60 with license plate 5TGN15 please report him or her to me? Because your car is hacked.
Start with the beginning, first slide.
Why would a program not default to the first slide?
No idea. Okay.
This is Daan, Keuper,
Thank
Keuper. We're trying variants every time he presents at NLNOG.
Yep, correct.
Daan, the floor is yours.
Thanks. So,
And
thanks. So, I'm the only thing standing between you and beer, so I'm in a comfortable spot. No? Oh, quiz. Oh, I'm fine. Okay. So I have all the time in the world. So, my talk is about car hacking, because basically your car is also a network, so it's relevant for here. This actually doesn't work. Nope. Okay, so this is me, not very interesting. I'd like to break stuff. I work for a company where we do security testing, but basically we do software verification, both on security, performance, and functional. And within the company we operate a research and development lab, which we call the Chaos Lab. And last year we presented some research we did on a specific SSL certificate authority, which allowed you to get free SSL certificates for Google and GitHub, etc. Then at Lekker Weer NLNOG, we presented some research we did on Ansible. And, well, our new research topic is car hacking, so here we are. I want to do is very small recap on my previous presentation. I did a presentation about Ansible and some security risks in there, some vulnerabilities we found. And basically, the takeaway from the presentation was that with every configuration management software, the risk is that if an attacker knows to compromise a single server on your network, and he has a vulnerability in, for example, well, we had vulnerability in Ansible and Salt, but Chef and all the other Puppet, etc. also have vulnerabilities, of course. They will allow the attacker to take over the controller. Yeah? And from there on, the attacker has access to all your devices in your network. So there was a remark from somebody in the audience who said, well, actually we don't have servers, we only have routers, but we use configuration management software there as well. Does the same risk apply? And I said yes, but it didn't have any data to back that up. So Job said you should look at Napalm. So I did, which resulted in a minor security issue fix they released a couple of months ago. I want to show you a short demo. On the right-hand side is a Arista router. It doesn't really matter, it works on every router. And on the left-hand side is the controller that's using Napalm to change the configuration on the router. So the right-hand side is a router I, as an attacker, would have gained access to. I will run my exploit. The controller will do some verification using Napalm, or it will update some settings, which gives the attacker a shell on the controller. I can just execute commands there. So from there on, he, of course, has access to all other routers in the network. So, yes, we love automation at Computest as well, but do mind the risk of, well, software contains vulnerabilities. So, onto car hacking. As the research topic, Chris said to me, why don't you look at cars? I said, well, okay, well, let's try that, see how that goes. The reason we chose cars is that cars are much more connected than you might think. Already in 2015, 35% of all new cars were connected to the internet. And the experts say that in 2020, all cars will come with internet connectivity in some sort. The most important thing is that the cars will be on the roads at least the cars we're selling today, it's at least 2030. Yeah, so all vulnerabilities we find now, if they're not patched, there will be a vulnerability in 15 years from now. But even if your car doesn't have internet connectivity, who has a car here with internet connectivity? Quite a few, actually. Okay, but even if your car doesn't have internet connectivity, there's plenty of attack surface that an attacker could use to gain control of your car. And I just want to give you a brief recap in this presentation. So it all started out with the BMW 8 Series in 1988, which was the first car that had a CAN bus connectivity in their car. CAN bus is a bus protocol, and throughout the years, more and more components in your car are getting connected to this bus. It started out with your engine, because now the mechanic can get some engine information when you're at the shop. So the engine is on the CAN bus, but also your windows. Whenever you press, you want to say, okay, I want my window down. It will be a message on the CAN bus that will send a signal to the actual motor that will pull down the window. So your window is also on the CAN bus. Your locks are, of course, also on the CAN bus. So whenever you press the lock button, the immobilizer will kick into shape, which will actually disable the spark plugs in the engine, etc. So your lock will send a signal to the engine, okay, the car is now locked, so you shouldn't start, even if the door is open, etc. The key, of course, or your lock, of course, is wireless nowadays. Yeah, it can either be with a push button, which we knew adaptive keyless entry, or passive, which means that if you're near the car will open itself. Okay. Your brakes are on the CAN bus as well. For example, if your car has adaptive cruise control, which means that there is a front radar in your car, which has to send a signal to the brakes. Okay, there is a vehicle ahead, so please slow down. So your brakes are currently also electronically controlled. Your steering to support park assist, or if you have lane assist in your car, that means your steering also needs to be controlled electronically. Your tires are also connected to the CAN bus because they are required to feature the TPMS system, tire pressure monitoring system, which is a wireless system which sends a signal on the CAN bus whenever your tire pressure is low. Yeah, that's the light indicator in your dashboard. It uses TPMS, which will then send out a CAN bus message. And of course, your infotainment system or your sat-nav is also on the CAN bus. And your infotainment system usually has a pretty large attack surface. It will have Bluetooth, so you can do hands-free calling. Some cars will have a Wi-Fi hotspot setting, so it will also have a Wi-Fi router in there. And of course, some cars will have internet connectivity, and that's mostly because those cars will also have a mobile app to come with the car. So you can see where the car is parked and if the doors are locked, or you can already set up the AV of AC, etc. So if you look at this schema, there is already quite some attack surface, even if your car doesn't have internet connectivity. So the CAN bus protocol itself is very straightforward. It basically consists, every CAN bus message consists out of an arbitration ID, which is 11 bits. There is an extended format to 29 bits, but the standard is 11, which is just, okay, this message has ID and number, something, something. There are some control bits, and then there are 8 bytes. This picture, it looks like bits, but it's 8 bytes of data, and the CRC at the end. That's it. There's nothing else. So on the CAN bus itself, there is no authentication, no encryption, nothing. Once you're on the bus, you can send whatever you want. Yeah, so you can impersonate whoever you want. You can send whatever you want. So if you're on the CAN bus, theoretically, you can say, okay, I'm the front radar. and I see a vehicle ahead, so brakes, please apply pressure. There's nothing in the protocol that will prevent you from doing this. So theoretically, if you're on the bus, you control the car. Yeah? Okay, however, things are not always that simple. The first thing is that the CAN bus protocol is not actually standardized. It only standardized, well, okay, there's a CRC field, an arbitration ID, etc. But what each message ID means and how the data is encoded, that's up to the manufacturer. There's no standard about that. So it's very difficult to understand what each message on the bus actually means. Also, because there is no to and from address, you have no idea who's sending what message, etc. So if you're on the CAN bus, it's actually very difficult to figure out what is the front radar and how is it sending its messages to the brakes. Also, the original devices will also still be on the network, sending contradicting messages. So if I'm impersonating the front radar and will say, okay, there's a vehicle ahead, please apply brakes, the original front radar will say, nope, there's not. And in general, the cars will choose for the safest option, which is either to disable cruise control from now on, or just do nothing. And of course, some systems won't operate above a certain speed, so your parking assist, which theoretically would allow me to take over your steering, doesn't work if you're above 10 kilometers an hour. And more importantly, the most cars have multiple buses. So the engine is not actually connected to the same CAN bus as your lock or your infotainment system. This works by applying a CAN bus gateway, which is a physical device which will separate all the CAN buses, and it will do some kind of firewalling. So the infotainment system cannot send direct messages to the engine or the brakes. So if an attacker can compromise the infotainment system, he cannot send a direct message to the brakes, apply pressure. The CAN bus gateway should stop that. But obviously, there should be some information flowing from the high-speed CAN bus to the low-speed. So, sorry, the left-hand side is the low-speed CAN bus, the right-hand side is the high-speed CAN bus. The high-speed CAN bus is used for all critical components like brakes and engines. But your infotainment system needs information from the engine to display mechanical failures or etc. So it needs some information about the engine. So the CAN bus gateway allows certain traffic to go from the engine to the infotainment system. But in some cars, it's also the other way around. Some cars allow you to change some driver settings. So put your car in sports setting, for example, via the infotainment system. So in that case, the infotainment system is allowed to send this very specific message to the CAN bus gateway, to the engine, to adjust some settings. The CAN bus gateway isn't applied in all cars. For example, the 2015 Jeep, there the infotainment system, which also had the internet connectivity, was connected to both the high-speed CAN bus and the low-speed CAN bus, which from a security point of view is a bad idea because, well, connecting things to the internet and your most important infrastructure, that might not be the best idea. So if we look again at the CAN bus protocol and look at how signals are encoded, you have a high-speed line and a low of a CAN bus high and a CAN bus low. They typically operate at 2.5 volts, but if you want to send a low, the CAN bus high signal will go to 3.5 volts and the low to 1.5 volts, which means that the zero is dominant. Yeah? So if two devices at the same time send a message, the zero will win. And this is because the CAN bus has no clock signal. There is a very high chance on collisions. And the reason they choose this is because the lower the arbitration ID is, the more priority, the higher priority is, does the message have. So typically, a device with a very high message ID will pick up the transmission error first, because they will send a 1 before the other. And then the CAN bus protocol specifies, okay, if I have 32 transmission errors, go into a passive state, and then you have 128 errors just completely goes offline. This is a very useful primitive for an attacker because this creates an effective denial of service technique. I can now say, okay, I want the front radar to go offline by generating collisions in their messages, and after 128 tries, the original front radar will be completely silent on the CAN bus, which allows me to impersonate him on the bus. So in preliminary conclusions, in practice, if I'm on a specific CAN bus, I can control everything that's on that bus. Of course, the gateway will stop me in some situations, but the gateway is also just software, so it might contain vulnerabilities. So the conclusion should be that you don't want to have an attacker on your CAN bus. Yeah? If that happens, all bets are off. So if we look at the previous slide, there is actually, even if the attacker isn't sitting inside the car, he still has a lot of attack surface. He has a TPMS system, which is wireless. He can do stuff with the key, etc., with Bluetooth or via the internet, and all use one of those attack vectors to get access to the CAN bus. So these are the typical attack surface that we looked at. And just zoom in a little bit. The key fob, which is basically the new hot wiring, which you always see in the movies, but that doesn't work for the cars that are younger than 20 years. We have seen some attacks on the key fob as well. We have seen some cryptographic attacks on the key fob. Specifically the MegaMouse crypto key, which was used under over 100 different car models, which allows an attacker to open the door, which is already bad, of course. But from there on, if there are actually vulnerabilities on the receiver for each lock, that would allow an attacker to get control of the CAN bus as well. We have seen some attacks where the CAN bus line was actually, you could reach the CAN bus line if you went under the car, and you could actually grab one of the CAN bus lines from under the car. So what some thieves were doing, they would actually grab the wires and just attach a small device to it, which would send a CAN bus message over the CAN bus saying, okay, please unlock the doors, which would work. So currently, all CAN bus lines are embedded deeply inside the car. That's not easily be reachable from the outside. And of course, what we currently see a lot is the relay attack against keyless entry or keyless starts. Who here has a car that has this feature, which is basically you don't have to push a button. If you're near the car will open. If you sit inside the car will start. This can be defeated by a small device, and what it basically does, it just relays the wireless signal. So one thief will stand next to the car with a small box, but will send out the signal. The car is typically sending out. It will send the signal to somebody who is standing near the front door of the owners of the car, and they will look if the key will respond. So it's just relaying the signal. This will always work. And there's also not really a solution for this, other than putting your key either in a metal container, which kind of defeats the purpose, or having a button on the key that turns off the keyless entry system, which also kind of defeats the purpose of having keyless entry. This is one of those devices. They cost $20 on eBay, so they're very cheap. And you can use that to unlock every modern car. Another attack vector is TPMS. It's legally required on all cars. It will sit inside your tire, and it will send out a radio signal typically, but you have some models that use Bluetooth that offer more security. Typically, it's a radio signal, and they will send out a signal every 60 to 90 seconds, telling the car what the current tire pressure is. It only works on close range, a couple of meters away. Maybe you can, if you have a strong antenna, you can get a slightly bigger range. What an attacker can do is spoof the packages from your tires. There's no encryption or authentication there as well, as long as you have the variant that uses radio signal rather than Bluetooth. And if you send a TPMS package saying, okay, the tire pressure is extremely low currently, what your car will either do is, or it will shut down the engine, or it will force itself into limp mode, which is, okay, the car is only allowed to drive up to 50 kilometers an hour. Of course, the TPMS is also connected to the CAN bus, so vulnerabilities on the receiver side will give an attacker access to the CAN bus as well. I know that some law enforcement agencies are currently using this technique in a car chase, so they could remotely shut down a car by spoofing TPMS signals. Then you have the ODB2 connector, also legally required on all cars. It's used for diagnostic purposes. It's a physical port in your car that your dealer can connect to, or mechanic. It's a debug interface. It therefore has access to all CAN bus rings, so the high-speed CAN bus, which also has your engine, and the low-speed CAN bus. But there's currently a growing market for telematic dongles, and they're usually required by either your insurance company or by your lease contractor. Yeah, so they hand out these telematic dongles, which will send some data to the lease company, for example. This where you're driving and what your speed is, etc., etc. For this, they typically have a cellular connection. Yeah, so they're just hooked up to the internet. And we have seen some attacks against those dongles as well. So you could, they could attack the dongle via the internet, which would give you direct access to all the CAN bus lines, including the ones that have the engine, etc. But the by far largest attack surface is your infotainment system. It typically will have the cellular connection, it will have the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, it will do all the audio decoding, it will do stuff with receiving traffic announcements, etc. Some cars even have browsers in there, so you can browse the web while you're driving or something. They by far have the largest attack surface. For an attacker point of view, those are the systems you are most likely interested in. So we already saw some attacks against the IVI system. The first attack was in 2012. Some researchers showed that they could gain access to the high-speed CAN bus if they could get the user to play a malicious MP3 file. They could, there was a vulnerability in the MP3 decoder. They could use that to gain access to the infotainment system, and from there they could send messages to the engine and the brakes, etc. They never released what kind of car they actually attacked, but they showed it was possible. With the previous attack, you had to convince a user to actually play an MP3 file for you, which, actually you would like to have a fully remote exploit that requires no user interaction at all. And Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek presented this a couple of years ago at DEF CON. They had such an attack for the Jeep. They found that the infotainment system actually had a D-bus interface listening on the cellular interface. So via the cellular connection, via the internet, you could just speak to the D-bus daemon on the infotainment system of the car, which got your remote code execution, which has, so you have shell on the infotainment system, and that car actually had the infotainment system connected to all CAN bus lines. So also the CAN bus line with the engine and the brakes, etc. There was no gateway in that car. So via that way, they could control your steering, control your brakes, etc. Basically everything in your car. Last year, some guys showed that they could also do this with a Tesla. The attack required a user to visit a website using the browser that's in the Tesla. They used a very old version of WebKit, contains vulnerabilities, that got them access to the infotainment system. The Tesla does have a gateway that prevented you from sending arbitrary CAN bus messages, although the infotainment system was also allowed to send updates to the gateway. And the updates were not signed. So what they could do was just get the original firmware, make some adjustments to that, and send out a new firmware upgrade to the gateway containing their backdoor, which would give them full access to every component in your Tesla. It did require you to visit a page using the web browser. They had a second attack where they said, okay, if you drive a Tesla within to a Tesla dealer, it will automatically connect to the Wi-Fi, so that the dealer already has some diagnostic information. But it will also then reload all pages in the web browser because you suddenly have Wi-Fi connection, so they could hijack. So it actually impersonates being a Tesla dealer, which would enforce a reload of the current page in the web browser, which then they could hijack, etc., etc. But then also you need to be in close proximity, at least in Wi-Fi distance. So, having said this, we thought, okay, that might be an interesting idea. Let's try this for ourselves. Most employees at our company have a lease car, so we have a pretty big pool of different kinds of cars and models, etc. And many of them have mobile apps, which also means they have internet connectivity. And our research goal was, okay, can we get a remote attack that requires no user interaction at all? And the first stage was, okay, can we actually get access to any component in the car via the cellular connection, which will most likely be the infotainment system, but and that could mean that there will still be a gateway blocking us from taking over the brakes or steering, etc. But it is a nice first step, and we take the research from there. So we looked at quite a few cars, and unfortunately we're still in discussion with the manufacturer, so I cannot tell you which model it is or which brand, etc. But we currently do have a fully remote attack that will work against some models, which will give you a root shell on the infotainment system. Yeah, requires no user interaction. Of course, this is dependent on if your ISP will do carrier-grade NAT and if the ISP will do allow client-to-client communication. But if you have an ISP that does that, which apparently is the case in some American ISPs, then this attack will work. I won't go into full details on how this works, but currently this is the state of our research. The cellular connection is connected to a system which we'll call CPU A. It will have an Ethernet connection to CPU B. Well, we had CPU A because of the vulnerability I just showed you. Getting access to CPU B was actually also quite easy because CPU A is allowed to spin up processes at CPU B. It uses the QNet protocol, which is a QNX thing, which allows you to share processes and file systems, etc. in QNX. It's enabled, so CPU A is allowed to spawn new processes on CPU B, which gives an attacker access to CPU B. That still doesn't give you CAN bus access, because the CAN bus messages are actually sent by a separate CAN bus chip. And CPU B is responsible for handling all low-level communication, and will talk to a serial interface to the CAN bus chip. And it's only allowed to send some very specific CAN bus messages, which is, yeah, we actually want to send every CAN bus message we want. And luckily, the entire infotainment system uses updates that are signed, but the signature of the update is only checked by CPU A. So what you can do is, once we have access to CPU B, we can just update the firmware of the CAN bus chip with a backdoored firmware version, which allows us to send arbitrary CAN bus messages. So we can currently send arbitrary CAN bus messages on the CAN bus that the infotainment system is currently on. Unfortunately, there is not much on that CAN bus line. We're pretty much directly connected to the CAN bus gateway. So that's where our research currently is. Trying to get either a vulnerability in the CAN bus gateway or find a way around the CAN bus gateway. The attack will work over cellular, but we found that even more models were vulnerable for attack via USB. We have a almost working prototype using an Android phone. Suppose your Android phone has malware, and you will plug it into your car. That malware can take over the infotainment system. So we have remote access to the IVI system. What does this actually mean in terms of impact? Well, we obviously know where you are because the car will have, the sat-nav will have, needs to have GPS, so we have your GPS location. We can control everything that's on your screen. We can control everything that comes through your speakers. Obviously, we can also disable the volume knob, so you can turn off the music off. We also control the screen, so you can turn the navigation system off, etc. And we can activate the microphone, because that's also connected to this for hands-free calling, so we can listen to whatever you're saying in the car. The IVI system that we looked at is shared between models, because, well, most car manufacturers reuse a lot of their components, because that's, of course, cheaper. The remote version exploit works sometimes. It's a little bit dependent on certain things. The USB attack that we currently have seems to work on every version of the IVI system. So our conclusions are, getting this right is extremely difficult. There is a lot of software in your car currently. And we understand there are benefits from having a connected car. I also like the fact that if I press the gas pedal, my engine sends out a message to my infotainment system, okay, maybe you should bump up the volume a little bit because I'm going to make some noise. There are also some benefits from having your car connected to the internet, because it's nice that you're sitting inside and you can say, okay, it's cold outside, let me just preheat the car for me, so it's nice and warm when I'm walking to the car. So we don't want to, nor we can stop this. So the downside, however, is that everything in your car is currently software, and of course, software contains security vulnerabilities. And most cars don't have an over-the-air update mechanism. So if your car has a vulnerability, the only way you can fix that is by going to the dealer and ask for an update. And most users will do that maybe once. But the problem is, of course, that the cars that we currently have on the roads will be there for the next 15 years. So this problem will stick with us for the next 15 years. So it's a problem we can fix for the future cars, but not for the cars that are currently on the roads, which is a little bit scary if you think about it. That was actually it. Everything. Yeah.
Wow.
Any questions?
Well, before we kick off the questions, I would like to remind the audience that under Dutch tax laws, old-timers older than 40 years, you don't have to pay taxes. So I think we have a second benefit nowadays because the 40-year-old cars will barely run M4. Let's start here. I think you were first.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Christian, and I would like to thank you for upgrading my upcoming car from excited anticipation to probably a death trap.
Probably.
That is all.
You're welcome.
So, given that basically what we're buying now are pre-configured computers with wheels, closed source pre-configured computers with wheels, can you see a time where, in order to protect us, the consumers, we're going to have to do something about this software, either code escrow with the government or, heaven forbid, open source Teslas, so as to allow, should the company disappear in 10 years' time, people still being able to patch the security vulnerability on what has now become a remote control missile?
So I know that every car manufacturer is legally required to send all the software to the Dutch government. So they have all the software, but I don't think they will give it to me. And also currently the manufacturers also don't really like to hand out the software to me. So we have a little bit of a problem there. So what we currently, we need some way to manage security vulnerabilities in the cars that are currently on the road. And currently it's a very close system. So this kind of research takes time, and it's not because it's technically challenging, however, well, it is in some cases, but it's also because there are no tools, the software is closed source, there is nothing to go on. And yeah, even if that's a little bit more open source, that would already be beneficial, of course. Of course, that will also be beneficial for the actual attacker, and not just for me. So two sides of the medallion, but well, in general, we think that security by security doesn't work. So if we would have open source cars, that would be tremendous. But I don't think that will be happening anytime soon.
Very short follow-up. What do you drive?
Volvo V60.
Yeah, I drive a Volvo V60.
Firmware 1.3.
Hi, I'm Daan from Keuper. The apps that are used on phones, are those safe? Because I've got a car which is connected to the internet. My app uses HTTPS to connect to my car. But there is a way around that. I can insert my own keys, so I can extract all the data.
So we saw this with the Nissan Leaf. They also featured an app with an API, of course. And if you wanted to unlock a door, it would send an HTTPS request to the Nissan Leaf API saying, okay, I want to unlock the lock of the Leaf that has this serial number. And there was no authentication check at all if that car actually belonged to you.
Nice.
So you could just iterate all the serial numbers and open all the locks of all the Leafs around the world. Luckily, nobody drives a Leaf, so the impact was rather small.
Check Oslo, they are
No,
there.
actually, my neighbor has one, and he's not very fond of it. So the apps will most likely also contain vulnerabilities, but we didn't look at the apps because we wanted to stay on the legal side of this because all the manufacturers are slightly bigger than us, so we didn't want any legal fights.
Thank you.
I think this is extremely worrying. I mean, our government is not necessarily known, or any government is not necessarily known for keeping pieces of data secret. So I think once a breach happens and source code ends up on the street, and as you mentioned, a lot of these cars do not even have over-the-air update mechanisms. You throw away your car?
No, but even if you look at the WikiLeaks CIA Vault 7 leaks, there was already indicators that the CIA of NSA is actively looking at car security to also get remote access to cars. Interesting times.
Thank you, Daan. Awesome.
You're welcome.